we'll start with the complex of Ali Shah in Tabriz in this class. Now, just to give you an idea of the types of sources that we can sometimes use to get information about architecture, there's a translation from, hello, do you have a question?
No.
Then please stop talking. We have a source that is actually from a Mamluk historian, but it's one exceptionally that gives us a lot of information about the complex in Tabriz. This was built just at the time, 1318 to 22, when the Mamluks and the Mongols had finally made a peace treaty. And the Mamluks sent one of their main emirs, Aitmish, to negotiate this. And he went to the capital and was very impressed with what he saw there. So he had a secretary with him, a dawadar, who saw the mosque, and Aitmish evidently asked him to write an account of it. So I'll read you just some of the main parts of it. Okay, he founded it and built it such that no one could build one comparable. Beside it, he built 2 baths, among the most remarkable. When he wanted to build this mosque, he brought engineers around them and indicated that they should build it at a gate of the city. He ordered that its measurements and height should be like the Iwan Kisra, but 10 cubits higher and 10 cubits wider than it. What's the Iwan Kisra? Anyone heard of this?
I've heard of Iwan, not Iwan Kisra.
What's an Iwan?
It's the Iwan it's the school, right?
No.
Like a place for praying.
It is one place where prayers are carried out, but it doesn't designate a place for praying. What does it designate?
It's just like, it's easier if I draw it than really describe it.
Give me, well,
Okay.
drawing it actually is not that easy, I would have thought, but there is a definition that fits it more or less.
Okay, it's like a room with 3 sides. One side is completely clear, but it's more like a hall.
Maybe you could take the bag off there so that Megan can sit there. Exactly, a room that is closed on 3 sides and is open on the 4th. Usually vaulted, but in Cairo from the late 14th century onwards, they started to have flat roofs. So Iwan Kisra. Kisra is another word for Khosrau, who was a particularly famous Sasanian king. Yeah. So this building, Isabel, you know it, do you?
Is it that, wait, no, the thing from Ctesiphon.
Ctesiphon, exactly, yes. This is Ctesiphon, or in Arabic, Al-Mada'an was the name of the capital of the Sasanians, quite close to where modern Baghdad is. This is all that is left of the palace of the Sasanians, the palace of Khosrau, as it was thought to be, and it had the largest brick arch in the world. It was also famous for its riches. The booty was carried off from it after the Arabs conquered Iran. So that's the single largest arch in the world, and that is what Ali Shah, the builder of the complex in Tabriz, he was the vizier, by the way, the prime minister under the ruler Abu Sa'id and Al-Jaitur. That's what he ordered his mosque to be bigger than, an Iwan that was 5 cubits higher and wider. So let me just carry on with a little summary of some of the main points. He built a quadrangular pool, 150 cubits wide in the middle of the mosque. And in the middle of the pool was an octagonal dome on a square base, every corner of which had a statue of a lion which poured water into the basin. And there were also 2 fountains which produced a great number of water, and 4 boats. All sides of the basin are covered with Alamut marble. So, I mean, that's an unusual feature. We have, well, a pool that is big enough to be almost a small lake with boats in the middle, with a pavilion in the center. It gives the width of the mosque 400 cubits square, arcades in every quarter, octagonal columns. There are 2 tall minarets in the mosque, each 70 cubits in each spiral. Spiral there is probably a misinterpretation, yeah?
How much is a
Cubit. Would be in Arabic, would be dhira. Anyone know that term? Cubit is exactly an arm span, yes. Okay. So it's, I mean, the measurements they usually get for it when they apply it to modern or to ancient buildings from the description are about 54 centimeters. Each spiral. The spiral probably refers to the decoration on the minaret. We'll see some other examples of that because, you know, a staircase inside a minaret by definition would be a spiral one. It goes up around the circle. Around the mosque there are 80 windows of copper pieces. In each window 200 round panes inlaid and engraved with gold and silver. And in the Qibla in which the Imam prays are a dome and 2 pillars of Andalusian copper with glorious inlaid and engraved gold and silver. This is a bit unlikely. Nothing like this has survived. What he could have been mistaken for is a kind of tilework that we've seen. What kind of tilework would look like it would be made of gold and silver? Luster. It has the metallic sheen on it, which is actually from silver or from copper, which could look like gold. So there were 4 doors to the mosque, and at each was a bazaar and shops, and various lamps and copper chains inlaid with gold and silver were hung in each. So it had a bazaar surrounding it, probably built for it, and with the revenue from the shops and the bazaar going to the upkeep of the complex. Anyone heard of Ibn Battuta? Who was Ibn Battuta? Yeah, he was a very famous traveler from the Maghreb, from Morocco originally, who went all across the Islamic world. He went on the Hajj, he went to Egypt, then to Iran, to the territories of the Golden Horde Mongols, to the Ilkhanid realm. In fact, he went on to India and China, came back again, and wrote a very detailed account of his travels. He visited this mosque and says that it also had a khanqa and a madrasa attached to it. So we were talking about the complex that Ghazan Khan made, and we mentioned that it had an unusually wide range of functions. So that's another trend that is displayed in this particular building complex too. Now this is a European drawn panorama of Tabriz from this source, Maurier Second Journey, Description de l'Arménie, made in 1673. And L here probably represents the remains of the Mosque of Ali Shah as it was then. Now, in fact, we're also told by later Iranian historians that the vault over the main Iwan fell down not long after it was built. So for a while, it actually was the largest brick arch in the world, but something went wrong and they didn't quite calculate it. From here, it actually looks as if they had some kind of semi-dome perhaps over the end of it. Maybe they were experimenting with transverse vaulting and they didn't quite get the supports right, although that's surprising because what is left is actually massive, extraordinarily massive. The word by which this building is known in contemporary Tabriz is the ARIC, which in Persian is a fortress. And if you have a look at this viewpoint, which is taken from the back of the Qibla, this is the Qibla Iwan. You can see, well, there's been some damage to it. You can see a number of what look like deep holes in the structure. How do you think they got there?
Cannon.
Yeah, these are cannonballs. So in fact, it actually was used after it stopped being used as a mosque. It was used as a fortress for a while. But such is the massiveness of the walls that the cannonballs barely made a dent in it. And we'll see a parallel to that when we come to discuss one particular building in Egypt. Dana, you've done 206. What building do you think that would be? What?
That big one.
What other massive religious building do we have in Cairo that was used temporarily as a fortress and which has cannonball marks in it? You've done 206 as well, haven't you? Yeah. Sultan Hassan. In fact, there's another parallel because the patron also asked that it be built bigger than the Iwan Kisra. Yeah, this detailed photograph just shows you the massive thickness of the walls, which should have been more than enough to support any vault on top of it, but we don't know exactly what miscalculation they had, but they messed up to a certain extent. And this is an earlier photograph. The staircase will give you some idea of the scale. This is the outside of the Qibla Iwan. So the Qibla side is here. Beside it, there must have been an extremely tall vaulted hall. You can see the base of some muqarnas, some stalactite vaulting here. So the roof level of the halls beside the Qibla Iwan would have been at this height, extraordinarily high. Today, sadly, it's actually used as the musalla of the city. And just at the moment this was taken, it was being used or was being restored. Anybody remember what a musalla is? Literally a place of prayer, but it has a specific meaning with regard to a building type in Islamic history. You haven't come across that? No, it's the place of prayer that was used for the Eid prayers outside of the walls of a city where all of the congregation could gather. This is one attempt at a restoration plan of the building. This is found in one of the main sources of a book by Wilbur on Ilkhanid architecture, which has the remains of the Iwan here, and he put an arcaded courtyard, purely speculative, for the madrasa and khanqa that Ibn Battuta says was there, but I think that's probably misleading. We actually have, from the descriptions that I mentioned, the main measurements of both the outside walls, of the courtyard, and of the pool. Now, the pool, in fact, looks as if it's a little bit large to fit comfortably within the courtyard at this stage. So maybe they should be altered a bit. But probably there were also 3 other Iwans. The standard mosque plan in Iran at this stage, well, who can give me an example of an earlier one? Those who have done 270 should be able to. Well, you've got lots of mosque examples, but what other examples do you know of? Which, give me a name. That's in Iraq. Yeah, that's a good example. That would be an earlier one, yeah. Any particularly famous 4-Iwan mosque you know of? Nain, no, it's not a 4-Iwan one. No, it's a hypostyle one. The period before this is the Seljuk period. Maybe that'll help you remember one. Any big Seljuk mosques in Iran you know of? Isfahan, the Isfahan Friday Mosque. Those of you who haven't taken 270, another reason to go back and look at the textbook for it. Okay, the one before this. Well, speaking of 41 mosque plans, here's one. The next building on your list is the Varamin Friday Mosque. Varamin is a town that's a little bit south of Tehran. When this photograph was taken, the mosque was a little bit isolated in a field close to the main town. Now the town has expanded and it has completely engulfed it. But this shows you the entrance Iwan, the Qibla Iwan, and the Qibla dome chamber. Half of the mosque on the right-hand side has fallen down. Now the next photograph is taken looking from the field in the opposite direction to this. So on the left-hand side we can see the Qibla dome chamber. We have the Iwan in front of it, and we have one of the side Iwans, taller than the surrounding vaults, and this would be the entrance Iwan on the right-hand side. So, your name again is? Zainab. Okay, Zainab, so what sort of plan is this? This is a plan of the building. How would you describe it? What are the main features? You can read plans by now, I hope, yes? Well, there's some things that aren't terribly obvious. Okay, what is this? No, let Zainab, what's this?
A dome?
Yes, exactly. That's the Qibla dome chamber that we were looking at. Okay, the little dots indicate the vaulting above that area. Magid, what's this? No, but what's this feature in front of the Qibla dome chamber? The one we were just talking about. The Iwan, yeah. Is the Qibla Iwan.
There's a line.
Yeah, this is the line of the courtyard,
Yeah.
which is at a different level.
So there's this three. We have three.
So, Nada, what else is around the courtyard? For instance, you have a space here that's a little bit wider than the two to either side. And that applies here as well. This is wider than these two spaces. Could that be significant?
Entrance?
Here's the entrance. The entrance you would expect to be opposite the Qibla, and if you remember, when we were looking at it, here was the entrance.
Yes.
Okay, do you remember we mentioned this feature on the side? Okay, it's a little bit taller than the
Qibla Iwan?
Qibla Iwan is beside the Qibla dome chamber. So this is the Qibla Iwan. So this is something else. Where would it be in the plan? If you're not familiar yet, all of you, with plans, you need to go back to somewhere like Creswell, which has lots of photographs of buildings with plans, and make sure you're able to match up a photograph with the plan, the viewpoint.
Are those Iwan?
Yeah, they're Iwans. So it has a 4 Iwan courtyard. This is the standard plan we were talking of that probably was in Ali Shah's mosque, but even by the Seljuk period had become very, very common. So 4 Iwan plan, Qibla dome chamber. entrance Iwan as well. All of these are typical of Iranian mosque plans. Here's a view of the entrance Iwan before it was restored. There are the remains of a couple of staircases on either side of it, and it's a possibility that, like many other portals from the Seljuk period onwards in Iran, it had 2 minarets on top of it. There are many still standing in Seljuk Anatolia. And you can just see some traces of color here. They're not terribly visible here, but in the recent restoration, it's a lot more obvious. So they're still using here the same range of colors that we had in the complex of Al-Jaitu and in the Abd as-Samad mausoleum. Dark blue, light blue, and unglazed brick between them. Yeah.
So both this building and the previous one are still all brick. No, they don't use stone. Or do they use stone in some areas?
No. Wherever stone is easily quarried, that's the preferred building material.
Isn't it possible to get stone in Iran in the mountains?
The problem is transportation costs. It's very heavy, so it's expensive to bring it for long distances. Where stone is available, they use it as much as they can. That applies to Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is the northwestern province of Iran, close to Anatolia also, where stone is standard. But even there, I mean, as you saw in the Ali Shah Mosque in Tabriz, it's all of brick. They actually have some stone foundations for earlier buildings, but that's usually as much as they can use. So if stone is available easily, as in Cairo, in the Muqattam Hills, right beside the city, or in Anatolia, where volcanic stone is very easy to quarry, that's the preferred building material. If they don't have it, they use brick instead. So, yeah.
Sorry, what was the other color instead of light blue and dark blue?
It's unglazed brick.
Unglazed?
Yeah, so I mean, the contrast here makes it look a little bit like white. So you get a 3-color contrast. So, which part of the building are we looking at here, Nadeem?
Which part?
Yeah.
Oh, the ones, probably the one on the left. But yeah, the only one remaining.
One at the side, well, one on the left. Left, related to the Qibla, say. Is this the Qibla Iwan, or is it opposite the Qibla, or one of the side Iwans? You've got 4 choices. It's one of the side Iwans, exactly. This is the entrance. This is one of the side Iwans, a little bit taller, a little bit wider than the other bays. And just to the right of this then is the Isabel. This is the Qibla Iwan, much taller than the others, which also is not unusual. Now, this obviously is not in its original state. Part of it is lost. But an interesting feature are these 2 upper story niches that you have beside the Qibla Iwan. Dana, what do you think these were for?
Second floor?
Yeah, well, certainly that's what it looks like. And they were probably topped by arches originally, so that the original outline of the Qibla area would have been like this roughly. Okay, with a, I mean, it's not quite to scale, but a big arch coming in here. Then we have two arches on either side. And obviously there's been an accident and we have lost the top part of it. So what would the second story have been used for? Well, certainly there is a tradition of using mosques as madrasas in Iran. But let's go back to the outside view that we had. so that you can see, in fact, what is behind that area.
There's stairs.
So here's the rear view of this same niche to the left of the Qibla Iwan. So what do we have behind there?
Is it just to access the roof?
Well, the roof has a staircase, but it's not from this niche. I mean, the niche can be accessed from the roof,
They're just
but not the other way around. They're just false, yes. Yeah, exactly. These don't lead to anything. They're just there for show. So it's actually the beginning of something that becomes very important in later architecture in Iran as well. It's facade architecture, where they are creating, in this case, a false facade, one that doesn't have anything behind it, just to make the building look more impressive. But it's only impressive from one viewpoint, from within the courtyard. If you're looking at it from outside, you see that it's fake, and it's not so impressive. This is a little detail of this area here. It's the end of an inscription that went around the Qibla Iwan. And what, Isabel, what's the material here?
Carved stucco?
Yeah, well, stucco is carved plaster, so you just have to say stucco. Yeah, so it's stucco. And delicate use of the light blue and dark blue with the unglazed blue tiles on the engaged column. But it's a fabulous example of Ilkhanid calligraphy in the design here.
Sorry, what was the calligraphy again?
Fabulous, I said. Wonderful. Great, great piece of design. What's good about it?
The intricate details?
Well, it has lots of details in the background. I mean, the letters themselves aren't specifically decorated, but we have a vegetal scroll in the background that gives a lot of extra detail. Okay, that's another interesting thing. We have two different inscriptions. What are the scripts in each one?
Well, that one's Kufic, but
Yeah, we have Kufic along the top, and it's a kind of cursive script in the bottom. Thuluth is probably what we would call it by, but cursive is enough for our purposes. Anything else that's particularly interesting in its design? Yeah, the overlapping, yeah. Or Isabel, yeah.
One of the letters is going outside.
As well, yes, we have a noon perhaps at the end, which sweeps across and covers some of the decoration in the margin even. It goes outside, but we also have this over and underlapping. We have some of the letters going behind the Kufic inscription that takes up the top quarter of the frame. Same here again. And the letters themselves cross under and over one another in a very attractive manner. So it's really one of the finest examples that we have. And we also have a spectacular stucco mihrab. Now, not all of it has been preserved, or maybe not all of it was finished. Yeah, okay, yes, this is the side wall in the Qibla dome chamber. I'll come back to the mihrab in just a minute. And here too, they're using tile work lightly to outline some of the doorways in a Kufic script there on either side. This is the main foundation inscription that runs around the four walls of the dome chamber. And Zainab, what do you call this feature in a building?
Squinch.
This is the squinch. And what kind of squinch in particular is it? What are these elements that fill in the squinch? These are stalactites or muqarnas. Okay, it's a muqarnas squinch. And above it, there is a what? What would you call this?
Drum.
Well, if it was circular, it would be a drum, but in fact, it's also octagonal. But it's an extra part of the zone of transition, which makes the whole dome taller. And that's one of the typical characteristics of Ilkhanid as opposed to, say, Seljuk architecture. It's become taller in proportion, narrower base, arguably a little bit more elegant. And this is a good example of how this is accomplished. This, for the most part, looks like a bit of a jumble. It's difficult to make out. The definition isn't very good, but a lot of the problem, again, is that we have lost the original paint that would have picked out the patterns in different colors and made it easier to read visually. But there is still a spectacular Kufic inscription. I've got a detail of that coming up. So again here, you can see just how much thought and effort has gone into planning the inscription, the way in which it also intersects with a second upper Kufic inscription.
How many levels of stucco?
Well, exactly. I mean, that's the amazing thing. You have the letters on top overlapping with one another. They're overlapping part of this decoration, which is on top of this, which is on top of this. And you have a background away down there. So you're playing with about 5 different levels. It's amazing. And this is just a small part of the whole Qibla wall.
It's too much.
Yeah, well, it looks a bit overwhelming. It may have been even more so when it had colors, but we don't know. The next one I want to show you is a detail of this little panel here. My God, what about the motifs that are used in here? I mean, how would you, these look very different from these ones. What's the artist basing his designs on here? Different?
Owner or the owner ruling the country?
Well, I mean, it's not. I'm trying to think of where he got his ideas from. I mean, not a person, but visually. What was he copying, perhaps?
China?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This is like a Chinese lotus. This like a Chinese peony form, which we saw, I think, perhaps in some of the earlier luster tiles. So this is actually a unique example where they tried this in stucco.
That's the only one?
That's the only one that I know of that has this to the degree, at least, that it resembles the chinoiserie flowers. And it's very different, you can see, from the more traditional symmetrical arabesque that is used in the adjacent panels. This is also unusual in not being quite symmetrical.
It looks 3D.
Well, it is 3D. It absolutely is. That's the beauty of stucco. Yeah.
That's sculpture.
Okay. Next on your list is the Friday Mosque of Yazd. Okay, we have several dates that are associated with this. We have 1324 for the dome, the entrance portal, and the foundations of the Iwan or Avan. Avan is the Persian, original Persian pronunciation. 1334, the Iwan was completed, and then a bit later, the revetment. What's a revetment? Yeah, something that covers something. It's the tile revetment in this case. The tile decoration that covers the prayer hall and the vestibule was added a little bit later in the Muzaffarid period, actually. Now, we had these rulers when we looked at some of the manuscripts ruling in southern Iran in the second half of the 14th century. So this is one that was started under the Ilkhanids and finished under the under the under the Muzaffarids. Yazd. I mean, this was taken a while ago, but it shows a town that hasn't changed much in the medieval, or in the cityscape since medieval times, where the main visual focal points are, in fact, this is the Qibla dome chamber and the entrance Iwan of the Friday Mosque. There's another medieval mausoleum visible in the distance, and here too. This is a city that's built mostly of baked brick, vaulted. Anyone know where Yazd is? Ah, okay, yeah, that's taken for granted. But which part? No, it's in the southeast. So, I mean, just very roughly. Well, take Iran as being a rough circle. Isfahan's roughly in the middle. Shiraz is down here. Kuruma. Yazd is a town here that's on the edge of the great central desert. So you can guess from looking at the vaulting of the roofs, not much wood around. And in fact, there's not much water around either. They get it from springs beside the mountain in qanats, in underground channels that they dig, which is another speciality of Iran. So the Iwan that we were looking at in the distance and the Qibla dome chamber, you have them both here. They're at right angles to one another. The entrance to the courtyard is different from the Qibla direction, which is to the left here. So from here you can see the Qibla dome chamber and the Qibla Iwan. So, Nada, what about the this entrance Iwan? What's unusual about it compared maybe with any that you've seen before?
Parallel minarets?
Well, it has two minarets, although that's a feature we mentioned that was present in some earlier Seljuk buildings. Anything else? Nadim?
The fact that it's compartmented, that's divided into two from the inside.
Yeah, that's interesting. Also, you have an upper balcony with a window in it, which is a bit unusual. Yeah, the proportions too are much more elongated than anything that we have seen. So we were talking about this trend in the Varamin Friday Mosque. It's even much more obvious here. And one other interesting feature, Isabel, what would you call this? It's a flying buttress. We're not actually sure if this is part of the original or not. It's not impossible. But maybe they thought it being so tall and narrow that it wasn't going to stay up very well, so they added this just to make sure. So this is the original area of the building. The entrance Iwan that we were looking at is here, leading into a vestibule. Courtyard, Qibla Iwan, Qibla dome chamber, and there are two covered halls to either side. These are transverse vaulted halls, in fact. The lines show the vaulting. But we're going to concentrate on the main building.
Why is it that the entrance is on the side though?
I think it would have had to do with the street layout at the time and with where it was possible to get access from. Presumably some of the local householders owned the property that was opposite the Qibla, and so they couldn't arrange an entrance from that side. And in fact, the center of the city is roughly down in this direction. So this is where most people would have come from. But you're right, it is unusual. Where possible, they wanted to emphasize the symmetry of a plan by having the entrance opposite the Qibla, as in the Vernamin Friday Mosque. But it's not always possible. The Isfahan Friday Mosque, for instance, the Seljuk example, is surrounded by a bazaar, a souk, and it doesn't have any principal entrance from the outside. So here's a view from the courtyard looking towards the Qibla Iwan and into the Qibla dome chamber. Now just have a look at this carefully for half a minute, because I'm going to ask you what's unusual about it compared with what we've seen before. Dana, do you have any ideas?
Is it a double pointed arch entrance?
A double?
Pointed arch entrance?
You're talking about maybe this pointed
Yeah.
arch and this pointed arch?
Yeah.
Yes, but you have to go beyond that to tell me what makes it so unusual.
Maybe because it's very big, it has to be supported by double arches.
No, it's not a question, I think, of adding extra supports.
Or visually.
Visually, it's an echo of the outer one, which is interesting. But, I mean, certainly this is a feature that's relevant to the novelty that we have here, but it's not specific enough to tell me how it's different from earlier examples. Well, anyone else?
The fact that it just goes straight in and there's no third door, another door into the Qibla chamber.
Exactly. It's open. The back wall of the Iwan isn't there. It's completely open. So the best way to appreciate just how different this is to look at this. So here we also have an Iwan in front of a Qibla dome chamber. And there's this tiny little opening in the center, two small ones to the side. That's as much of the Qibla dome chamber as you can see. There's a big wall that separates it. And that's absolutely normal. That's what all of the combination of Qibla Iwans and dome chambers were like until the Yazd Friday Mosque was built. And so there's a much greater feeling of openness, of spaciousness here. Although it's also a little bit surprising in that this didn't become standard. We're going to see in the next couple of classes, when we start looking at Timurid architecture, the one building where this is prominent in the next century, which is the Gohar Shad Mosque in Mashhad. So it's just worth remembering that now as a parallel to this, as the one major parallel. But even though it gives this extra feeling of openness, for some reason the later architects didn't think it worked that well, perhaps, and so it didn't become common.
But isn't it hard to have this and then have the dome on top? I mean, structurally speaking.
Well, the
There's an empty spot with no support.
that's true. It is arguable that there's less support for the dome, but that's, if we go back to the
Yeah. No.
to the piers that support the dome, they're still fairly substantial in width. Well, in fact, they have quite a few openings around them, but they are relatively thick. I suppose they tried to compensate for it in that way. And yeah, you can see the dome above the Qibla Iwan. The Iwan, in fact, in this case, is perhaps a little bit lower than the height of the dome as well. So they may have adjusted the proportions of the two to make sure they had enough support for the dome chamber. But that's a good point. Here's a view of part of the side wall of the Qibla dome chamber. We saw from the plan that it had much more openings than usual. Anything else that is different from earlier Qibla dome chamber interiors? I mean, think, say, of the Varamin Friday Mosque that we've just looked at. How would you compare the two?
Well, there are 2 floors like
That's a good point. There's an upper story here, a kind of series of balconies. In fact, they've closed them off for women's prayers at this stage. Yes, there's a grandfather clock in one, not part of the original furnishings. But having a 2-story compartment is most unusual. And this, again, equally unusually, links with the Iwan that's in front of the Qibla. You can see it has these galleries that go around to the side of the dome chamber. We're not really sure what kind of function these had. Okay, they've closed off part of it for women's prayers at the moment, but this is a relatively new feature. In general, women weren't expected to attend Friday prayers, so there wasn't a special space that was set aside for them in most medieval mosques in most Islamic countries. Yeah, so it's still really, as I say, a bit of a mystery exactly how they were used. Here's a view of the mihrab. Zainab, any difference here from the Qibla wall that you notice obviously between it and Varamin? Well, okay, let me quickly go back to Varamin. Here's the Qibla wall, okay, and we'll rush ahead to Yazd. What's the difference?
The mihrab is not stucco.
The materials of decoration, yes, we have mostly tile decoration now. And much more of the Qibla wall, and in fact of the whole of the Qibla dome chamber, is now decorated. So they're using tile for the dados, simple hexagonal monochrome glazed tiles. Monochrome means what? Just one color. Then we have a variety of colors that are used in a regular geometric pattern above that. There's detailed tile mosaic that's used for the inscription that goes around the base of the zone of transition. Yeah.
Is this a window?
And this is a window. There's a grill at the back of it. And that's true also. To have a large window, such a large window in this point is also an unusual feature. There's more light coming into the interior than we're used to. We have,
Is this random?
is this?
Random, that pattern.
No, it's not.
It looks random.
This pattern?
No, these lines, green lines.
Okay.
These.
No, it's not random. Anyone tell me what's unrandom about it?
No,
Yeah,
only,
yeah.
Only a couple of them. Not all.
This is square kufik, yeah. So, what does this say?
I have no idea.
No. That one, it's the 3 on top. You should be able to read. There's a swastika below it, which is simple geometric decoration. But what is it? All right, let me see how they've written it here, yes. What's that? It's a very familiar name.
Ali?
Yes, Ali.
It doesn't look Ali at all.
It is if you know what to look for. If you're used to reading square Kufik, and obviously they're putting it in very large form, so they're encouraging you to read it. So yes, the zone of transition, another example of Nada, what kind of form is this? What's the definition of this area?
Stalactites?
Yeah, and stalactites within a squinch, yeah. Another example of a stalactite squinch, and it's linked to little arches that provide the base for the circle, which, when you go further, leads to this. So again, the motif of increased tile decoration extends even to the interior of the dome. So in fact, this is a very significant change on any earlier example of dome decoration. We have much greater use of tile work than in previous examples. Little whirling design at the center, which is found in some other Muzaffar examples. It's also common in contemporary Mamluk metalwork, for instance. And in fact, there is another little piece here which is signed by the builder. So this is a feature that's found much more often in Iranian and Anatolian architecture than in Cairo, for instance, where the craftsman responsible signs his work. Now,
Listen, I don't think anyone would know it's a sign from down.
actually, this is poor definition. It's true that from on the ground, you wouldn't be able to read it. It's probably only with the invention of telescopes and telephoto lenses that you can actually read it quite closely. But the builder was proud enough of his work that he wanted it to be remembered, and so he left it there. The next photograph I'm going to show you is a detail of this part. What do you call this part of an arch? No, pishtak is a whole arch that's in front of something else, but this area, this is the spandrel, okay? Useful term. So, Nadeem, what sort of decoration do we have on the spandrel?
Vegetable.
It's vegetal, certainly. It's based on either plant or floral elements, but specifically the types of floral elements that the artist is using, where did they come from?
I'm not sure, but they don't look that Chinese.
No? What about this?
Egypt.
Well, this is a form of plant of which we have a type in Egypt, but it's different in Egypt. This is the lotus, but this is a Chinese lotus, not the pharaonic style lotus. Yeah, this is the Chinese lotus. This is the peony form. That, I mean, they look different, okay, in tile work than they did in stucco, but essentially it's the same types of flowers that they're copying. What technique is this? And what makes it different from earlier tile work that we've seen?
It's flat.
Okay, it's flat. It doesn't have raised levels contrasting with one another, which we had in many of the earlier ones. Why do you think they don't need raised levels here? We have more colors. What colors do we have here that we didn't have before? We have white,
And goldish.
and we have a kind of yellowish brown, ochre. It's a color that can vary between those, between that range. And there's one other color. It's not
Green?
terribly obvious, yes, but here's a dark green. Yeah. Yeah, this little medallion. I'll tell you what. Well, Isabel, are you learning Arabic?
Yes.
Okay.
It's not.
Tell me more about this little medallion here. What type of decoration do you have within it?
Well, we have a
Calligraphic?
decoration. Well, it kind of looks like that.
Okay, it does look a little bit like calligraphic decoration. What does it say?
No, it's not Ali, is it?
Hmm?
It's not Ali, is it?
Well, actually, that's the least obvious one. But you're right. You're right.
No.
You're right. Yes, it's Ali, Ain, Lam. Yeah, it's Ali repeated
Yes.
6 times. That's one part of it, but there's something else as well. And Muhammad, exactly. Very good. So Mim, Ha, Mim,
Wait.
Dal. 6 times. Mim, Ha, Mim,
Ah, the
Dal.
blue, yeah.
in blue. Yeah. So Muhammad, and you have Muhammad 6 times as well. So
Anything else?
I don't think
No.
anyone, unless you've studied this, I don't think anyone would be able to read it.
I think it's a fabulous example of design, and anyone who's literate, I think, might expect to find some decoration like this, and so they would be looking for it. You know, if they saw the alley up above and the square kufik, they might be looking for it here. But I have to admit, I was teaching using this slide for a long time before I saw it myself. The Muhammad I saw right away, but the alley wasn't obvious to me in the beginning. So it certainly isn't obvious. You're right, but if you look carefully, it's certainly there.
Detective key.
Yes. Okay. This is another little detail from part of the decoration on the mihrab. It's actually this little panel here, just one of the friezes at the side. Oh yes, we didn't talk about actually, well, the technique of tile decoration. What do you call this particular technique? I mean, we've had monochrome glazed tiles, we've had luster tiles. What's this? We've had overglaze painted tiles and underglaze painted tiles. And this isn't any of those, it's something else. Anyone know the term for this? Or how is it made?
Paint? No?
Not paint. You don't paint in tiles. The tiles are put in an oven and fired. Yeah, they're ceramics. But you start off by painting a glaze on them before you fire it, yeah. And we talked about the fact that this is flat instead of being in relief, because now the greater range of colors enables you to pick out the pattern. Because of the color contrast, you don't have to rely on the different depth to get the pattern. This is what's called tile mosaic. I'll show you a detail from a workshop in which it's being made in one of the next classes. But they start off with square tiles, which are basically monochrome glazed, and you fire a lot of these off in the different colors. And then you draw out the pattern very carefully, and you cut out the square tiles to fit onto the pattern. And in fact, what you would do is you would have a cartoon, a drawing of the pattern flat on the ground. You place the pieces with the glaze downwards on them, and then you put mortar on top of it, and when you're finished, you hoist the whole panel onto the wall.
Wow.
But maybe here you can see some of the little joints between the areas of different color. So these are really very small pieces fitted together like a jigsaw puzzle. So that's what tile mosaic is. You'll also see an older word, mosaic faience, used for it as well.
It's a long process.
It's a long and expensive process because of the labor that's involved. So this is one of the most impressive and prestigious forms of tile decoration. So that's what they're using here as well in this part. And black is another color that they're also using. This is the full range of color now that we're going to have in this technique. Black, light blue, dark blue, white, green, and ochre. These are the only colors that they use. The black actually is made from manganese, and sometimes if it's diluted, it can look a bit purplish, dark purple, but it's the same color essentially. What about this panel above it? What sort of technique are they using there?
This stuff
It's a mix of
It's not stucco, although it does look very like it, you're right, but
limestone.
it's not stone either.
Is it just unglazed, right?
It's unglazed, but obviously, how did they get the repeated pattern? With a stamp, yeah, with a mold. And if you mold a pattern before you fire it, you call it terracotta. So these are terracotta tiles. They're unglazed and they're put within a frame of these monochrome glazed turquoise to reinforce the idea of the use of tilework that was becoming popular at this period. Just a couple of photographs of the Kuruma Friday Mosque, which is from about the same period. They were adding tilework to the Yazd Friday Mosque. This is from the middle of the 15th century. It's not a very good photograph, this, but in fact it's a bit misleading because the Survey of Persian Art, a huge series of volumes produced in the 1930s, which is on reference for you. It has a photograph of this with most of the tilework missing. So a lot of this is restoration. But there's a vestibule that has the original tilework still intact just behind this entrance. And it has some of the same features that we saw in the Yazd Friday Mosque. We have a dome with this whirling motif at the top. We have square kufik, and it's a fairly restrained range of colors at this stage. The final revetment in Yazd may have been a little bit later than this, 1375. This is a little bit earlier. So we don't have the green here, for instance, and I don't see any black either.
Does it say Muhammad and Ali?
I see a lot sort of backwards there. It's probably a mirror image of another one that is here. But no, I don't see, in this case, Ali. Or unless this is a part of it. That's possible. But no, there's no epigraphic decoration there. Okay, we have a few minutes left. What I want you to do for the last 5 minutes is give me two things. On a sheet of paper, I don't want your name on it, it's not a test. I want something that you considered important from today's lecture, number one. And number two, a question. Something you need more information on, something that wasn't clear about either today's class or anything earlier. Okay, and you can just leave those on the desk as you're going out.